I'm Jim Sellen with VHB Miller Sellen, and really happy to be a sponsor. This community is a real laboratory for these students in terms of planning and urban development, and it's just great to see them all here. And I think there's been more every time we've had one of these, and to combine the students with the people from the community and the businesses is a collaboration that's going to be essential, not only for the survival of the community, but the survival of the students. So I'm really excited to see that. Tonight is the third in a series that we're devoting to healthy community design. It's sort of the newest thing in the planning profession. Really, it's the newest thing in terms of community building. And part of that is being able to energize the environment and to create healthy places for people to enjoy in terms of pathways and in terms of green spaces, and how important that is in terms of making it easy to be part of a healthy community. So Randall's going to talk about that tonight, and again, we appreciate being here and having the opportunity to be a sponsor. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Owen Beich to introduce our speaker and facilitate our panel.
Yeah, historically, it's been our basic philosophy to make our introductions reasonably short. We believe that we do such a great job of organizing these events that by the time the crowds start to filter in, they know more about our guest speaker than I possibly can convey. And that would be my way of trying to do a better job of introducing Randall Arndt than Jim has done. I think one of the things that has really distinguished the speakers that we have brought to this event has been their unusual perspective, their unusual bent on planning as a profession, and all the various allied skills and professions that planning supports. When I was chatting with Randall Arndt earlier this evening, he said he wanted me to convey a single point. And I think it's philosophically aligned with the way we have chosen guests to come here at the previous events all through the last 3 years. Randall says that he stands at a 90-degree angle to the way most planners think. And I would like to believe that all the students that come through our program will take from his cue and also think at 90 degrees to the way the profession thinks, because that's really the only way the profession will evolve and embrace new ideas and skills. So with that, I don't think I can possibly outdo Jim's introduction. I will turn it over to Randall Arndt, and I think that he will entertain and educate and inform you, and then we'll follow this up with a panel of hopefully equally provocative ideas. Randall?
Well, good evening. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk about one of my favorite topics, and actually there are a lot of different facets to it. But after 40 years in practice, I've concluded is really the most basic part of community planning, apart from common sense, is the importance of greenways. And fortunately, greenways are a way to bridge a lot of different design approaches. I'm going to be talking tonight about how you can use greenway planning to bridge the new urbanism with conservation design. One which is a little bit more urban in focus, and the others maybe a bit more suburban in focus, but we are going to have development in all kinds of areas over your future career. And a way to build healthier communities, I'm going to align myself pretty much to what Dick Jackson said a few months ago and Jeff Speck. I'm going to be speaking, making points that I've made in a number of books over the years, Envisioning Better Communities, whose subtitle is Seeing More Options and Making Wiser Choices. Really a highly illustrated book. Very non-technical audience would be for local, planning board members and planning commissioners. And Crossroad Hamlet Village Town, whose subtitle was Design Characteristics of Traditional Neighborhoods, Old and New. bringing the best of the past into focus, and showing how rural planning principles can be used to inform even suburban and urban design. I began my career in the UK, but quickly came back home for family reasons and settled in Maine, where I have returned recently to live. And this is a picture of a traditional nucleated village, highly walkable. It's the Village of Hope in Maine, up near Camden and Rockport. And it's still surrounded by meadows and fields and forests and orchards. And everything is walkable. Harrington, Maine, again, is slightly larger, but very walkable. These were built before the motor car, as was Bath, Maine. This would be the front street in Bath, and the back of Front Street, showing the great elevation and the several stories of residential that are above the retail commercial at the ground level right there. Whether you're in Selma, Alabama, or anywhere else in a traditional community in the United States, homes are built. I should go back to that. Homes are built closer together, closer to the sidewalk. They're knit together with footpaths. Sometimes they're paved with brick. Sometimes it's Portland cement. And communities should not be without the threads that link it together. A traditional thread is a sidewalk, but I would say also another very important thread are the greenway systems that I will illustrate from a number of new urban communities have been designed. Unfortunately, most planning codes in the United States today allow and sometimes make it difficult to do anything other than this type of development, which is probably you go to any planning school in the country and this will stand out as being the bad example. But why are we still building that? We need to challenge the communities that have these on the books, because this is the legislated way of doing planning, to separate uses, to have no mixtures of uses. I don't see any sidewalks in this. I don't see any street trees. There's no place to walk, not even in greenway trails. This is about as bad as it comes, but probably 80% of the residential development in this country is a variation on this very sad theme. My wife grew up in upstate New York in mid-Hudson River Valley, and it still was quite rural while she was growing up, and this is that rural part of Dutchess County. It's got a lot of white space because it's basically farms. Within 15 years, between the time she was in early grades of grammar school to the time she graduated, these subdivisions were built. It's wall-to-wall subdivisions, and within each subdivision, wall-to-wall house lots. I call this the triumph of zoning over planning, because I've never seen any planning document anywhere that would advocate for this type of development. Now, I'm a little bit exaggerating when I say there's no open space. There are, if you look closely, the wetlands along the creek and the playing fields around the middle school. So you happen to be a 12-year-old or a frog, you're all set. But again, this is the triumph of zoning over planning. When communities did a lot more planning, many communities did a lot more planning in the 19th century and the early 20th century before they adopted zoning. Zoning became the crutch. Oh, we don't have to plan anymore. Or we can write the plan, but that's just an advisory document that sits on a shelf. We don't really use it. About 20 years ago, I went to work with the Land Trust in the Philly suburbs, and we helped communities plan their open space systems in advance of the development. Because if you don't plan the open space systems prior to development, you don't get the systems, you get fragments and scraps. So this is one township in Chester County, PA, and the black areas are totally unbuildable. They're wet, they're flood prone, they're steep. And the yellow and the green are various types of what we would call potential secondary development areas. The white is already developed. This is a rural community and still mostly undeveloped. And we're mapping out the farmland in one color and the woodlands in another color, and then of course the unbuildable land in the black. And the idea is to map out this and not just color maps green and cross our fingers, which has been the habit of the planning profession for 60 years, if not more. What do we do to ensure that the open space systems remain intact above and beyond the unbuildable land? In most cases, the answer is not much. In the case of many communities, there are about 4 or 5 dozen in Pennsylvania now that follow the growing greener approach to mapping out the open space systems and making it stick. So when a developer comes in, he designs around them, not just the unbuildable land, but maybe some of the arable cropland, or maybe some of the upland woodland habitat. We will drill down into this in a little bit when we talk about a development called Weatherstone, which is on this map. But moving up to the county level, this is Orange County. Now, it doesn't look like Orange County, Florida, because it doesn't look like the state of Pennsylvania in outline. This is Orange County, North Carolina, and they mapped out their greenway networks in advance and adopted growing greener conservation design, subdivision regulations, and zoning regulations. And they put it on the books as an option for developers. 3 years later, they learned that developers were so comfortable doing business as usual that not one had opted to do anything different, even though, as my good friend at the ULI, Ed McMahon, says, money really does grow on trees. But we're all creatures of habit, and developers, if they've got a winning formula to do X, Y, and Z, why change? So Orange County said, we need to change the pattern. So we're going to have the developers bring in 2 quick and dirty concept plans. One is respecting the green infrastructure, and the other is business as usual, staying away only from the wetlands, floodplains, and steep slopes. And staff got to choose which one to recommend to the County Planning Commission for approval, for approval. And invariably, the planning staff chose the one that was in line with the conservation design, greenway design planning approach. And the planning commission would tell the developers, if you want approval, you got to do it this way. You've got the same density, you've arguably got lower cost with shorter streets, and if you got utilities, shorter utility runs, and a whole lot less tree clearing and a lot less land grading, because you're not going to go across all corners of your parcel. You're going to be focusing your development on maybe 50% of the buildable land. West Manchester, Pennsylvania, a small township near the city of York, and therefore near the Maryland line, went one step further and went on tax parcel maps and colored certain parts of tax parcel maps green, not to tell developers they must leave that land as open space, but to suggest that because they had to respect 50% open space set aside, this would be a good place for them to set that land aside. But they would entertain, and they have entertained developers saying, well, instead of the green space that you've identified, how about this other green space? And as long as it will all connect together, they're pretty well fine with that. But it's a way of going a little bit further and initiating proactively an idea to the developer that the green space network ought to be in a certain place or another. Now, master plan communities have for many years mapped out the green infrastructure from the beginning. And some of the major master plan communities of the 1960s, like Columbia, I believe that's Columbia here, and Reston, certainly followed that. Although you could argue that their street pattern would be much different today if it were to be designed like 50 years later. But greenway trails link all the neighborhoods in Reston and Columbia, and these greenway trails are really important for health and even for transportation. My wife and I would often walk the trails in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, going from one park past a school up to a mixed-use center and back. That was an old railway line, which will become a bike path, like the first picture, 2 pictures ago. And on the way, we pass a dog park, where people come, and the dog park is actually zoned for large dogs on one side of the fence and small dogs on the other side of the fence. So zoning actually has a function in in the dog parks. The greenway areas must be designed around from the get-go, as I said, or else they won't be. Greenways are clearly designed around in this aerial photograph from Huntersville, North Carolina, in the Charlotte area. You can see some of the 70s and 80s standard suburban development in the upper left-hand corner. And you can see the greenways going through between the two new urban areas. And in the southern part of the photo is a school which will be expanded into some of that open space with playing fields. So Huntersville is one of a number of communities which have embraced both greenway planning and new urban planning. Davidson, North Carolina is another one, and I like to mention that Davidson requires a charrette for every development. It could be a half-day charrette, it could be a 5-day charrette, depending upon the size and complexity of the development. It's a way of getting everyone around a table talking with each other before a design has been created. If a developer waltzes in with a design that his engineers just spent $50,000 bringing up to the so-called preliminary plan stage, instead of starting at the beginning with a sketch plan, then that's kind of a recipe for disaster. But if you begin at the beginning and have folks come in with a site analysis map, and you walk the property, you come back and you talk about what should be saved and where the development ought to go, you evolve into a design either in an afternoon or within a week. And that is really the way to go. Greenway planning is nothing new. Frederick Law Olmsted did a ton of it at the turn of the century. This is one of his designs from California. You're well familiar, I'm sure, with the emerald necklace around Boston. Here's another sort of circa 1965 greenway design from a master plan community. As I said, if this were to be designed today, we'd probably do a more new urban kind of urban fabric between the greenway ribbons. And I'll be illustrating that quite a bit in the course of my talk. But this would be from the Woodlands near Houston, designed by Wallace, McHarg, Roberts, and Todd. And the greenway goes from more rural parts of the woodlands through suburban areas right into the urban core. Now, we can create that same kind of effect of a master plan community by taking our county, as Orange County has done, or a municipality, and mapping out that green infrastructure. Both the unbuildable green infrastructure, which is going to remain pristine regardless, and maybe a third or a half of the buildable land, which might be the best of the woodlands or the best agricultural land on the property. So it's really important to do a community-wide map of potential conservation lands, adopt it into the comprehensive plan, and adopt ordinances that will require developers to pay attention to that when they lay out their new urban or their other development forms. Site analysis maps need to be juiced up. We all require them, but sometimes they're just bare bones. But I like to see where every species of tree is and what size they are. I like to see the cultural landscape as well as the natural features. Then we should follow it up with a mandatory site walk with the developer and his engineer and his landscape architect and the planning board and the planning commission and the abutters. Because if you hold the abutters off at arm's length until the preliminary plan stage, then things are ossified, they're set in place. The developer spent a ton of money doing a plan without a lot of input, a lot of involvement, and no consensus. Build the consensus from the very beginning, from the get-go, through a site walk, and then the mini charrette. And through the mini charrette, you come up with a sketch plan. No developer should be allowed to come in with anything more than a sketch plan. I like them to come in with just the site analysis plan, and then we create the sketch plan collaboratively. This is a sketch plan that was created for Weatherstone development in Chester County, PA. And the black areas on this map coincide directly with the black areas on the map I showed you about 4 minutes ago, the map of potential conservation lands, the Greenway map for the township of West Vincent. So that township Greenway map informed the developer who hired Looney Rick's Kiss out of Princeton. Their main office is in Memphis, but they had a branch in Princeton, to walk the property with the Planning Commission and abutters and come up with a site analysis map. Here's part of the site walk. There's a site walk on another property, a site walk on another one, Willington, Connecticut. I know that one of the Ginger's from Danielson, Connecticut, and Willington is just next door. We got the whole Planning Commission out there on a frosty morning in March. Now down here, your March would look a lot greener, but we got them to come out on a frosty morning and spend the entire morning walking about 300 acres. And then we retired to the town hall and started to design right after lunch. It was an open meeting. It was advertised so the public could come. We had a few abutters, which is a good thing. This is walking land down near Dallas-Fort Worth with the developer. And the designing around natural and cultural features adds value to the project. I was asked to join a design team in Lakeland, Tennessee with Dwani Plater-Zyberg to be sort of the person that was looking after the green infrastructure. And I'm walking one of the better forests there with the landowner's son. We're looking at, I asked him to show me the best woodlands he's got, meaning of diversity of tree species and a diversity of ages and a very interesting forest floor of various wildflowers and ground covers. There's no substitute for boots on the ground. And if a planning commissioner doesn't want to walk the property because they're afraid of snakes or ticks or bugs or anything else, that planning commissioner should be repurposed and repositioned on the school board or the library building committee. Does not belong in the planning commission. I thoroughly believe that. If you don't go out and walk the property, you don't know enough to cast an intelligent vote. So don't even bother to show up. Now, if you're sick, you're on vacation, we cut you some slack. I walk in this property and I see this wonderful sycamore tree down in Oldham County, Kentucky, and I know that in 40 years that's going to be a real beautiful specimen because of its shape. So right now I'm thinking I can have a triangular park. You see how that splays out beyond the tree, and there's a line of trees beyond that, and that could be where a street goes. And there could be a T intersection, but it's going to be like a Y intersection. You go up to the tree and you split one way or the other, and you can create a triangular park there with the tree in that park and the line of trees, the fence row in the back, being a line of trees along the edge of the street. I mean, this is the type of planning that Raymond Unwin was doing in the Garden Cities in the first decade or two of the 20th century in southern England. And a lot of new urbanists look back to Raymond Unwin as being the person that really inspired a lot of their work. But I haven't seen an awful lot of evidence that a great number of new urbanists follow Unwin's kind of respect for the natural landscape and the natural features of the property. Not a single tree here is worth preserving. But as a group, it surely is, particularly in the context of a wide open landscape in Allen, Texas. That tree sat right in the middle of a street. No one had walked the property except the engineer, and engineers have this kind of blind spot about anything that's might add value to the property, like a beautiful tree. It's just not part of their curriculum to think about things like that. And the street was going to go right through the middle of the tree. The developer happened to be out on the property that day as they were staking the street, and he said, like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And so they said, time out, and they redesigned the street to be a much wider cross section to allow a wide boulevard park during that block. And at that point in time, all they could do to make that happen was to shorten the house lots on that street block, because it had such a wide boulevard median, which was not there in the first place. The tree was there in the first place, but it wasn't recognized. Guess which homes sold first? Sold for premium prices, even though they were shorter lots. The ones that faced this park with this gigantic tree. This is River Ranch in Lafayette, Louisiana. If you're ever in New Orleans area, it's a good development to look at. I was walking through the woods up in the Rochester area with my client, and we see all these wildflowers, including the trillium. And he says, it'd be a great place to put houses amongst the trees. I said, Chuck, you got a lot of farmland that's just never going to be farmed again, so why not put the houses there? He said, no, the house would be worth more in the woods. Let's put them in the woods. He said, these woods are rich with wildflowers. He said, no, I think that this is where we want to put the house. I happen to know, because I worked for him many times, that he was a graduate of a Jesuit high school and went to Loyola University. So I said, Chuck, you recognize that flower? And he said, no, what is that? He says, it's a trillium. I said, well, trillium, it's an odd name. He said, yes, it's a trillium because it's got 3 petals and 3 leaves. It's a holy plant. Now, in medieval times, if you disturbed that plant, you went to a very bad place after you died. Now, it's up to you where we put the houses, of course. And they ended up in the fields. I'm totally shameless when it comes to working with what I've got. The pinks you see all over Central Florida are nothing to do handstands or cartwheels for. But if there's 15% of the property that's just loaded with pinks, I'll look twice at least to see if there's a way to design around them, if there's not something more important to design around somewhere else. You're not able always to save everything that's important. You probably never think about moving that, but this might not even get on the radar screen. But there's a lot of biota there. There's a lot of wildlife that would live in an area like this, and so why not respect it? If we're going to have 30 or 40 or 50% open space by reducing our lot sizes, particularly widths, by 30, 40, or 50%, okay? Then we have the flexibility to shift the lots away from areas like this and put them in areas that are less special. It wasn't always done. In fact, it was rarely done. During the 19th century, the surveyors that went out across the continent, laying out town after town, this is Ottawa, Kansas, it would lay them out irrespective of the natural features. Looking at aerial photographs, you're able to see a lot that sometimes you can actually see more than when you're on the ground, because you can see patterns in the soils from an aerial photograph that you wouldn't notice if you're just looking down from eye level. And here's a potential greenway which is crying out to be recognized and designed around, because if you make that a greenway area, it's very easy to plant willows or sycamores or red maples, something that will like that slightly wetter soil and grow like a skyrocket in the sunlight on the farmland. I always look for patterns in the landscape in terms of designing around, and this is an example of a design I did for a residential developer in the Indianapolis area, and the greenway that runs through the middle in a kind of an angle was just a brown streak across the farm field on an aerial photograph. There was a ditch, which is on the ground, on the bottom, part of the property running parallel to the bottom, and that was the only thing that most site designers looked at. They said, well, there's a ditch down there, but there was a tributary coming into that ditch that was being farmed over because of the underdrains that the farmers had put in. Well, it's easy to restore that kind of hydrology by plugging up those underdrains that the farmers lovingly put in so they could till the whole property. So we're going to try to do a bit of restoration here so that we don't have house lots ending up like this, which is what some developers in the Midwest get because they don't respect the groundwater tables that are there. And they assume that anything is possible. Of course it is, but what's better than just filling that in is to leaving the area as a greenway. Here's a potential greenway on a farm in Arkansas. My developer client said, well, let's put a road there. It's got a bed there already. He said, that's not a road bed, that's just a farm track. There's nothing there that's really, you're going to have to bring in all the sand and gravel and sub-base anyhow. Those trees are way too close together to use as a street. So let's just make that a greenway, pave it as a bike path if you wish, or it could be equestrian path, the same way that was done here in the Lexington, Kentucky suburbs. That was just a farm track on an old farm, but it happened to also be where Civil War troops moved during what they call down there the War of Northern Aggression. And when the Planning Commission saw that the surveyor or the engineer had done his platting totally across that farm track with these lovely trees, they said, can you shift your design Can you just kind of tilt it around by 30 degrees and run your streets parallel to the old farm road there? Because it's a historic road, it's got lovely trees. And the developer says to the engineer, can we do it? And the engineer says, fine, it's just a CAD. We can easily swivel that around and rotate it, and they did. And these are the highest value lots. But it wasn't seen by the engineer. It wasn't even in the codes. It was just happened to be that one of the planning commissioners had a relative that had once owned the property when he was a kid, and he went out there and he knew the property from years ago, and he knew there was something special there that this subdivision design was going to obliterate. So it's important to get it in the codes so that when the developer engages an engineer, the engineer is not going to miss it. Four-step design process. Bring a little bit of landscape architecture thinking into the subdivision design process. Here's a piece of ground that sits outside the city of New Bern, North Carolina. That's the main road into New Bern on the bottom. And this is what you could max out for development. It's called a yield plan. All the green space in the top is totally unbuildable, really wet woods. So that's where we begin. That's what you normally get under normal codes. And step one of the four-step design process is where can you not build because of severe constraints. That's it, like that. And step 1B is what are the areas that you'd like to preserve that are buildable but would add value to the property. And we see here historic alley of trees going in, the old manor house, an outdoor room framed by pecan trees, a pecan grove back in here, the view shed, the historic view shed from the main road in. So obviously most of what will add value to this property is here. So the end of step one of the four-step design process is to color the map green where you want it to be green. And then the yellow area is the potential development area. So we're at the end of the step one, and this is the most critical step, and that's the step the landscape architect or a physical planner ought to be involved in. Step two is laying out the streets with the terminal vistas and the squares. Step three is the house locations, and step four is the lot lines. And we go from kind of a village core on the far right with maybe attached product to small lots to medium-sized lots to estate lots. And we get a alternative to this that looks like that. It's denser, it's more walkable, and it's preserved the best parts of the property. Lakeland Green is a project that is quite close to Memphis, and the landowner, Rudy Jones, brought me on board to be sort of the green eyes on the project. He wanted to get the best new urban firm he knew of, which was Dwani Plater Zyberk. And he said, Andre, is there any problem with having a landscape planner on board to map out the green infrastructure? No, he welcomed it. So I walked the property, though I could not get many of Andres' staff, who are all architects and not landscape architects, to be interested in walking the property to see what was out there. They'd prefer to work inside at tables with maps and aerial photographs. But you miss a lot when you don't go out there. You'd miss this trace, which is an old footpath network from Native American days. And this is the initial greenway map that I created after walking the property with Ian Jones, the landowner's son. Ian knew it like the back of his hand. And basically that informed the final design that DPZ had come up with as a result of the greenway analysis and the charrette process. Washington Highlands is outside of Milwaukee, and you can see the greenway running right through it. An interesting aspect of it is this boulevard, which goes around in a curving manner, and it creates the shape of a Prussian soldier's helmet. The designer was Werner von Hegemann, and that was his little joke, that he would design a subdivision in the shape of a Prussian soldier's helmet. Of course, it was well received because there's just a lot of Germans in the Milwaukee area. That was the Pabst farm, part of the Pabst farm. One of the kids that grew up in that neighborhood in the 30s and 40s was so influenced by it that he became the developer of the largest number of conservation subdivisions in the Midwest. Ronald Seepman grew up in this. So you never can predict what good things are to come out of a good design, that you influence a whole person's career He's then developed like 50 developments, all with greenways, as a result of having grown up in one greenway development himself. With a single, you can see the single-loaded street, which brings that park back into the public realm. Why I'm missing PA, this is the greenway plan for it with a creek, and you can see the pre-war part of Wyomissing to the north, the post-war part of Wyomissing to the south. What links the two is the greenway design. Again, it's Werner von Hegemann consulted on this with Elbert Peets, a landscape architect from Cambridge. John Nolan also consulted, and he designed some of the suburban lots around the central greenway. One of the important takeaways from here is that if you have a curving street along a greenway, you get a lot of views into the greenway as the road bows into it. And then it goes out, and then it bows into the greenway again, and your terminal vista going around that curve, the outside edge of the curve being green space, registers very much. You can see that going around that curve, you're going to be looking at the green space in both directions. Greendale, Wisconsin, laid out a little bit more rectilinearly by Elbert Peets. In the early 30s, one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's new towns. One was Greendale, one is Green Hills. This is Greendale outside of Milwaukee. And you could probably see the town center is here, the civic center is there, the elementary school is here. So this is your core. It is defined by greenways not only along the stream valley, but fingers of green space that go throughout. So we're leaving the sort of commercial core, going through the Greenway Park into the neighborhoods. An extremely healthy community, and one in which Chuck Flink grew up in. And Chuck Flink, for many years, a founder and president of Greenways Incorporated, the premier greenway and open space and park planning firm in the United States. And he has told me on many occasions that growing up in Greendale, Wisconsin, was one of the biggest shapers of his career choice. Village Homes in Davis, California is an interesting example. You might say, well, just a bunch of cul-de-sacs. Well, there are a bunch of cul-de-sacs there, but deliberately. It's a highly interconnected community on their bike paths and footpaths. Now, the BMW can't go to visit the Saab or the Oldsmobile very easily because they got to go up one cul-de-sac and down another, but people having legs or bicycles can go throughout because all of these footpaths connect with each other. They connect the different neighborhoods. They connect to the community gardens. They connect to the school. They connect to the orchard. They connect with everything, including the bike trails going to UC Davis and downtown Davis itself. So behind every cul-de-sac is a footpath system there and there and there and there and there. This one goes into the big common. These are some vineyards and community gardens down here. So it's highly connected on the basis of the footpaths, and it's a wonderful place to live for a number of reasons. It's flat as a tabletop. So you all in Central Florida can relate to that. What they did is they scooped out some areas to create swales and took that and balanced the dirt by making ridges like 120 feet on either side of the swale. So they got swale, ridge, swale, ridge, swale, ridge, and there's only like 18 to 24 inches from the normal land level to the depth of the swale to the height of a ridge. Enough for water to flow down into the swale. All the stormwater in Village Homes built in the early 70s, way before LID became current, is absorbed into the soil. There are no curbs, no gutters. They're built at 4 to the acre or 4.4 to the acre, and no curbs and no gutters and no need for them because the way that it has been contoured. Just brilliantly, very, very simply. Lots of gardens everywhere. They might be dooryard gardens in front of your house, gardens along the footpaths everywhere for people pushing baby carriages, people jogging, people riding bikes, rollerblading. Here we see sort of a close-up of the way the trails linked down in an east-west way, and the north is here and south is there. So the streets run east-west, the trails run east-west, and because the streets run east-west, all of these homes have a southern exposure. It is a solar community, passive solar design. It was nothing but a tomato field in 1973. It is absolutely gorgeous. And here you see the solar design and the greenway paths and the streets that serve each. There's a street coming through serving these homes. Here's a street that comes through serving those homes. But the end of the cul-de-sac is a footpath. The end of the cul-de-sac is a footpath. And the footpath connections everywhere. So it's extremely well connected. Here's some of the land behind the homes, between the footpath system and your back deck, if you will. Private gardens as well as community gardens. A lot of people commute to UC Davis, whether they be students or professors. That's the swale system. It's a very gentle but very effective swale system. And the footpaths are used a lot. These are not posed photographs at all. That's your swale right in through here. The swales are usually cut down another 3 feet and backfilled with gravel so that even major storm vents, when they empty into them, will empty into these troughs of gravel. Large allotments and community gardens in village homes. So much of the landscaping is edible on purpose. These would be artichokes. That's part of the vineyard. Some small grapes. Figs growing above this pergola. Close-up of some of the figs. Young girls picking cherries, these cherries in fact, pomegranates, lemons, mangoes, apples, those are peaches actually, and almonds. Last but not least, almonds, because so many almond trees were planted by the developers, Michael and Judy Corbett, that the annual harvest of the almond production pays for the maintenance of all the common open space at village homes. So the home association dues are really low because they've got this edible landscape, and not only stuff they enjoy themselves, but nuts that they sell to commercial to merchants. Qualicum Beach is on Vancouver Island, and it's a lovely little village that has done so much to make itself walkable and appealing to pedestrians, whether it's the street trees, the trellises, the benches, the vines, or hedges and raised planters with benches on one side to give people a feeling of security. They always like to have something at their back. Twittons or tweetons, a term that Olmsted brought back from England in his tour during the 1850s. A tweeton or twitten is just a little pedestrian connection between one block and another. So this connects 2 main shopping streets. And it goes through a little park, and in the background, back in here, you will see the grocery store, Qualicum Foods, which is at 3 levels because it's on a slight grade. So there's a basement level, which is actually at street level down here, but in that end of the block, it's a below-grade parking garage. The main level of the building here, which is at grade at this end of the building, is your grocery level, and your top level are offices and a restaurant. In the downtown of Qualicum Beach, which is a small community, highly walkable, and people say, well, how can you have a grocery store without a parking lot in front because we have to put the loading dock in the back? Well, it can work. I've seen them in Jackson, Wyoming. I've seen them in Qualicum Beach, British Columbia. A creative architect can figure out where to put the loading dock so you don't have to have a half an acre of asphalt in front of the supermarket, as many developers will tell you they must. There's a mixture of housing types, including some very dense housing within a few blocks of the downtown. It's quite an elderly population in Qualicum Beach, and the elderly housing is at the edge of the downtown. New infill building replacing single unit construction, single family detached, would typically look like this. Be oftentimes residential, if not offices, above the retail. There's a little sitting alcove at the corner. So we don't bring the corner of the building to the corner of the block necessarily, but we create a bit of a, a small enclave or alcove park. There are many woodland trails in Qualicum Beach, but there's also a paved trail, and that paved trail will bring a lot of kids, these are school kids, leaving school at 2:30 in the afternoon. So the safe routes to school is accomplished by the footpath system that they've created. On the left is a large senior facility. This is a site which is the back end of several house lots at the edge of the village, 3 blocks from downtown, being cleared for development, a development to be called Qualicum Gardens, with back lanes serving homes which front onto the green spaces, which are gardens, and those gardens be planted up like this. This is actually on that property today, and it's the prototype for what will go into the green spaces, part of building a healthy environment within walking distance of the downtown at a higher density. Town of Tioga in Gainesville is designed around a long alley of trees, which was within the forest and hardly distinguishable as an alley because the forest had just grown up around the original alley of trees, which was defining an old farm lane. Luis Diaz walked the property that his father had bought maybe 15, 20 years ago and noticed that some trees were bigger than others and they were kind of in a straight line. So he decided that that would be something to really design around as a value-adding feature, and it became that long alley of trees, which is the defining characteristic of the town of Tioga, which is a mixed-use development, includes a lot of residential but a strong commercial core as well. Here's some of the residential along that park, and it's part of the larger commercial core. Harbortown is one of the earliest new urban developments. I think it's dates from the exact same time as Seaside. Both were done independently as far as we're able to tell. And there are 3 greenways, one along the Mississippi River on the top, one along the Wolf River in the bottom, and an Emerald Crescent right in here. I've been on walking tours of Harbortown led by new urban advocates, and at the end of the walking tour, it's clear that the greenways don't fit into the speaking notes or the talking points. It's all about alleys and front porches and walkability, and those are important, but when you've got the premier new urban development that features greenways, and not to mention them in a walk around the town, strikes me as a little bit myopic. Fortunately, the developer had no myopia, and the developer hired, I think it was RTKL, to do this design. I'm not sure, it might have been Looney Rick's Kiss. It's a great design. You can see the internal greenway, which is in some ways the most impressive because it touches more of neighborhoods. And there it is in the middle of the project. And parts of it look like this, with the homes sometimes fronting up to the greenway, sometimes backing up to the greenway. And that would be its commercial core, part of it. Baldwin Park is my other favorite example of a new urban development that is built around a strong greenway network, which links playing fields to lakes, and the greenways go around some of the lakes. And it's just a very fine example that I think illustrates that it's totally possible to blend new urbanism with greenway planning, and the fact that it isn't done all the time mystifies me, because it's clear that greenways add value as well as adding a healthy component to the community. If you create nearby, attractive, convenient places for people to walk, just besides up and down the sidewalks, they'll get out more. They'll enjoy it more. Sidewalks are necessary, but they're never sufficient. You need to supplement the sidewalk grid with the greenway system. And in Radburn, it didn't follow any kind of predetermined kind of natural feature. I'm not featuring Radburn because I have to, be somewhat selective. So this is Baldwin Park. Valley West in Missoula, Montana is another favorite of mine. And that greenway that goes through this development is part of a mapped greenway that the city lays out and tells developers, we need you to create linear parks, and you create one section of the linear park, and your next developer is going to create another section of linear park. In 20 years' time, we're going to have a linear park. And that's going to be your green space contribution. So this is what a lot of the development there looks like. There are a variety of price points, but a lot of them are reasonably modest and quite affordable, thankfully. It's not just another upscale community, which 75% of the American public could not afford. The South County Bike Path links homes, shops, and schools, like in a small village downtown like this, downtown Wakefield. It was an old railway line, and I don't know whether it's even visible. I can't see it at all on this map. I mean, the lights are so bright in this room. But you'll have to take my word for it that it connects 3 schools and 2 village centers, Peacedale and Wakefield, and a lot of neighborhoods. So it provides safe routes to school, and it provides a healthy place for people to bike, to push their baby carriage, to jog, to rollerblade. And I see people of all ages enjoying it. I bike that every day for 12 years. And again, a Google Earth map, which I think is hard to make out. You saw that earlier. If you don't mix uses, you don't really get a healthy neighborhood. Yes, we need to increase densities, but if increasing densities just gives you this single-use kind of train wreck PUD, we're not making progress. This is not progress. Restricting parking is maybe something, an idea that we could think about. I mean, I'm grateful for all the free parking there is in downtown Winter Park. I spent a lot of time in Winter Park last few days, and parking has been easy. But I lived in Malvern, PA for 12 years, and I lived 2 blocks from the downtown. And I can tell you, in the decade that I lived there, I rarely saw any of my neighbors walking those 2 blocks. It was just too convenient to get in the car, turn on the ignition key, and drive down, because there's always a parking spot. The only people that walked downtown were the people that got the early trains. Because, the late trains. The people that got the early trains could drive down, get the parking spots, and the people that took the late trains would have to walk because there are no more parking spaces in the train station. But if you wanted to be go to the butcher's, the tailor, the bank, the 2 drug stores, small grocery, convenience store, there was enough free parking. People would drive 2 or 3 blocks all the time. That's why I just asked them, not to pry, but just kind of, I notice you don't drive downtown very much, just kind of curious. Oh, I don't have time for that. I'm too rushed. I work so many hours. Or I think I'm coming down with a cold, or it looks like it might rain, or it's too hot, or it's too cold. Well, there's always an excuse not to walk 2 or 3 blocks. So you can put people in a walkable neighborhood. You can put things 2 blocks away for them to walk to. But will they walk there? I don't know if many of them will, because in my experience in Malvern, they didn't. Maybe that's unique. I'm not going to generalize, but all I can say is that I don't believe that just because you put people a couple blocks from something that they're going to walk to it. Now, a lot of people just like to walk because it's, if you have a greenway or nice neighborhoods to walk through in the evening and stroll, they'll do that. If there's a park at the end of the street, maybe they'll walk to the end of the park. Maybe they'll use that bikeway in South County, in Rhode Island. But this is the grid in Malvern, PA. And the main street is right in there, and I lived right in here. So, it's like 1 block, 2 block, and right down to Main Street. So you can increase density, you can mix uses, and you can restrict parking, but maybe that's not always enough to get people's weight down. I believe in increasing density. I believe in mixing uses. I believe in greenways. I also believe in, restricting parking. But the primacy of diet, I think, is something that we should be looking at. This is an interesting graph done by OECD, or EOC, is it? Commission of Economic, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. That's what it is. And look at the red line. We're the fattest nation. But look at what's right below it. England, Scotland, Wales, the UK. Interestingly, England, since 1947, all their post-war planning has been mandatory, compact development within urban growth boundaries. Whether you're a village, a town, a city, it's an urban growth boundary with a green belt around it. Here's the town of Aylsham in North Norfolk. I know it very well. I used to work in rural Norfolk and not far from Aylsham. Dear friends that live there. In fact, their house is where that red dot is. In England, in Britain as a whole, if you want to develop, you don't have a minimum lot size, you've got a maximum lot size. Think about right angles to your profession. There's a minimum density, not a maximum density. You would build 10, 12, 14 to the acre, or you don't build. That's the way they get people together and living in a compact fashion, walkable to shops. Here's the downtown Aylsham, and you can see how compact it is. This is the grocery store right in the heart of downtown Aylsham, with the parking to the side and the rear. Right up the street is the central square, where there's a farmer's market every Saturday. You can just tell how compact, almost medieval, this street system is. Our friend's house is at the end of the street. There is a new infill development just a few blocks, a block and a half from the main square, which is here where the farmer's market is. And that's this development in there. And I'll show you what this development looks like. Along the street, it looks like this. These buildings were built about 15 years ago. And behind the buildings are these courtyard homes, terraced homes, very high density. So we see everyone is walkable to the town center. Compact development, high densities, mixed uses. And yet, you saw where Britain is. The United States is second only to Mexico in kind of being tubby. Okay, that's Mexico, that's the US, this is New Zealand, this is Australia, this is the UK, which since 1947, all their post-war development has been the antithesis of sprawl. 10, 12, 14 units to the acre within urban growth boundaries with walkable to mixed uses. So as much as we do in this country to improve the way we plan, I don't think we're going to fully succeed in getting our national health improved unless we also address diet and exercise. And I know Dick Jackson, whom I've known for years and corresponded with quite a bit recently in an update for my book, he agrees that good physical planning, land use planning is a key part of the solution. But it is only part of the solution. And I think that as we focus on building healthy communities, we should not lose sight of the fact that our schools have a lot of junk food. Our schools are too far away for the kids to walk. The way we're eating at home is not healthy. The fact that we're not walking or jogging or biking every day for 45 minutes to an hour and a half is not healthy. Is what's going on TV that compelling that we can't take an hour out from TV every night? Certainly we all have ways of recording our favorite programs, so maybe we watch a bunch of them on a day which is really too hot to do much outdoor exercise. So I've been talking a lot about greenway design, at sort of town densities, but you can easily do it at highly urban densities. One of my favorite places for that is Stockholm, and I'm going to end up on this. Kungsholm, which is one of the main islands in the archipelago of islands that Stockholm occupies, is surrounded by a linear greenway. And connected to that is this new infill development right in there. It links down in this area. So all these trees in the middle were preserved. They were in the middle of an old hospital that was taken down, and these 4-story buildings were built around the hospital in 2 crescents, around the park in 2 crescents. And the high-rises and the mid-rises were all part of this development. So you had a lot of density here, and it's within very much walking distance to the shops, which are 2 blocks away, and walking distance down in this direction to the greenway, which goes around the entire island. So this is your sort of dense infill development in the park that's in the middle, an aerial photograph of it, some of the high-rises, and going down into the greenway, which goes around the island. So I don't think there's any excuse for not to do greenways. Whether you're in a city, you're in a suburb, you're in a town, you're out in the countryside, you can always do greenways. And if you don't, then we're missing a key ingredient, I think, in a civilized neighborhood, in addition to the walkability of the mixed uses. My message this evening is pretty simple. In addition to doing all the good smart growth planning in terms of increasing the density, mixing up the types and price points of housing, mixing up the uses, the offices and the employment opportunities and the retail and the restaurants, that we should consciously design greenway systems to complement the sidewalk grid. And it's not complicated. I've often said that every planning commission in America should be required under maybe federal law to have at least 1 member not above the age of 12. And they'll tell us what's important, because they can't drive. They depend upon the greenways to get to school or to get to another neighborhood, to visit their friends, or to go out and bike all afternoon. And without that, I mean, if it's good for the kids, it's good for people of all ages. Take my word for it. And I think I'll just end at that. Thank you so very much.